The Big Footy Port Adelaide podcast is proudly sponsored by New Vision.
My team, kinda power. I love the power. I love the power.
Hi guys, and welcome to the Big Footy Port Adelaide podcast, a show about all things Port Adelaide Footy Club. I'm your host Macca 19, and tonight we have part 2 of our most influential recruit special with Fishing Rick and Ford Fairlane. Tonight we will be discussing our best and most influential AFL recruits. Hope you enjoy. Anyway, moving on and talking about Port Adelaide's history in the AFL now, and starting at the top back in '96 when we were just starting out, trying to land a bit of a big fish, and we landed such an important player in our history. Obviously, he played with us in 1990, won a premiership, went over to Essendon and played 127 games there, numerous All-Australian jumpers and a Brownlow medal in '93. He came back to be our captain in '97. Good old Gavin Wanganeen.
He's not a recruit.
Of course he is.
What are you doing here? He came from our heartland. What's going on here? That's just outrageous. You just want to talk about Gav.
Is that such a bad
Oh,
thing?
yeah. No, it's not.
It's not. I always considered Gav just someone who came home.
That's it.
So, but I guess, others would call him a recruit, but his heart was always with Port Adelaide.
Absolutely. Just how important was it landing Gav for that inaugural season?
Oh, it was huge. The guy, he was a Brownlow medalist and a premiership player, and nobody left big Victorian clubs. We couldn't quite get Nathan to come back, but Gav did. Gav walked away with all of those honours. He still came back to Port Adelaide and said, I think his words at the time were, I'm coming home.
Yeah.
And he did the unthinkable. And Essendon were one of those Victorian Big Four clubs, and just really rare for them to lose a quality player. It wasn't like, when Freo used to play with Freo and give them magic beans to pick up players like Matthew Lloyd. This was, genuinely quality player. One of their, I think they recognised as one of their great players during his time there, and came back to Port.
That's it.
And was just fantastic.
We did struggle to land a bit of a big fish that year. We were after Nick Holland, Scott Camporelli. I think we went after Tony Modra as well. Obviously Buckley. Shane
Chris
Grant almost got over the line, but chose to stay at the Dogs in the end. So landing someone like Gavin Wanganeen and him returning home was just huge. And he had such a fantastic career at AFL level for Port Adelaide as well. Numerous All-Australians, almost won a second Brownlow, probably deserved it in 2003, and of course just had such an untold influence on that 04 Grand Final.
I think he was underestimated too because of his versatility, because he didn't really lock down a permanent position and he could play everywhere. He probably lacks a little bit of the kudos that you get when you're a star player just in one position. But, the attributes that I always will remember with Gavin is not only that his skills, but he was hard. He was a physically tough player. He'd put his body for a lightly framed player where it shouldn't go, and he'd just take the hits. And I still maintain it's a bit of a weird observation on my part, but he was one of the most skillful players of being able to read the ball and how it was going to bounce off the ground. Yep. Some players can't do it, but he knew which way the ball was going to go, the way it was floating, and it didn't matter if it was a mongrel kick or whatever. His ability like that was amazing. And I still remember back in 2002 as well, when on the outer of Amy, I reckon he chased down the great Andrew McLeod, who was supposed to be one of the fastest players in the competition, and no one really linked speed with Gavin Wanganeen, but he was able to run him down. And a magnificent player and a great captain.
He was a great captain, and I think a lot of people consider that sort of 97 through to 2000 almost like the Gavin Wanganeen lost years, where no one really talks about them too much. He missed a lot of games through injury, but he had a marvellous year in '97 in our first year, playing as a midfielder. He was fantastic again in '98. He did miss quite a few games later on, but he did improve again once he relinquished the captaincy, but he was just a marvellous footballer.
One of those guys was probably a victim of his own high standards. People just had enormous expectations of him, and I mean, I still remember his first year in 1990 and just what a freakish talent he was there, and kicking those 2 goals in the third quarter of that grand final. And then you see him, a dozen years or more, 14 years later, and kicking them in prelim finals and grand finals to win Port Adelaide a premiership.
There's 2 other recruits in that first season were Matthew Primus and Stephen Paxman. Both came in a roundabout way from Brisbane, but obviously they came from Fitzroy as well. Primus refused to go to Brisbane, so it was one of our sort of big trades. I think they ended up with a high pick as compensation for that. But he paid us back in spades. Obviously became captain, was a multiple All-Australian player. Had ruck rules changed to sort of quell his influence on football games, and Stephen Paxman was just a rock solid fullback for us.
They're both terrific players. I mean, I remember Primus at Norwood when he got cut by Geelong and went to Norwood, and probably his first year there was fairly anonymous, and then really hit the gym and sort of built himself up into that man mountain that we all remember him as, and had this enormous year with Norwood as a ruckman, and went to Fitzroy and had a huge year with them. I think it was in their last year. And then, and those interesting rules that the AFL sets up, that he managed to find his way to Port Adelaide. And I mean, you've said all the things there about him, but a great captain, a great leader, and terrific player. It's sort of a little bit scary, I guess, when he kicked the ball. They might have missed the occasional target, but an enormous physical presence and quite a physical man. I mean, he was quite happy to give you a mouthful and a hand a bit out too. He was one of those great physically intimidating ruckmen, and I know it's always been a Port Adelaide thing. Cale always wanted ruckmen to be physically intimidating because the theory goes they're the biggest guy on the ground, so they should be there looking after the little blokes. And I think Jacqueline probably learned that as much from Neil Curley as Foss Williams, that was the way that it went. And Primus was just that archetypal big man, like that big, strong, physical presence, and would just take anyone on. And those knee injuries, it's just that was a football tragedy that just cut short what could have been an even greater career.
Well, he deserved a premiership.
He did deserve a premiership.
He did, and it was very unfortunate. And I wonder now, if he was playing now, would those ruck rules still be changed like they were back then? It's almost, that's how they want ruckmen to ruck now. Less jump and, more just a bit more physicality around the contest.
That's right. Probably the biggest trade we've done as our career was the Nathan Eagleton trade, where the Dogs were after him for a number of years. They got him at the end of 99, and we received Brett Montgomery, Matthew Bishop, and a pick that we used on Brent Guerra as compensation for losing Nathan Eagleton.
It was a huge trade, and I was sort of still had to laugh a bit at the end. I think when the end of Eagleton's career, and there were some Dog supporters trying to come, we won that trade in the end, and
no
I thought,
chance.
What was the point of who wins that? The whole point of that trade was that everyone got what they needed out of it. I think everyone won that trade. We got 2 players in Bishop and Montgomery who won us, were certainly big contributors to our premiership, and Montgomery, who just turned out to be such a good player, and they got Eagleton, who really developed into a really good footballer, which we thought he would be, and put on that physical size he probably needed, and probably got away from being a bit of a role player in our forward line and part-time midfielder to being a pretty, I guess, quite a consistent midfielder for the Bulldogs and a leading midfielder. And it was great. It was a great trade all round, and I think it sort of gives light to that fact that Port Adelaide got this reputation after the Nick Stevens fiasco about being difficult to trade with, when really in that trade we we just tried to be fair.
Absolutely.
All Williams wanted was a fair trade. And I think Port Adelaide have shown time and again that we'll trade fairly. And it's not about trying to win the trade. It's just a matter of we get what we want, someone else gets what they want. I mean, you saw it with the Pollock deal. The Port worked really hard to get that over the line. The Port worked really hard to get the Ryder deal over the line. And I think, they put any number of scenarios up to Essendon before Essendon finally just took the first and second round picks. And have we done this through our ages? And I think that trade was one of the great trades for everyone.
Even Melbourne. I mean, they got Stephen Powell out of it, and he had a pretty good career for Melbourne as well.
Yeah.
It's just one of those trades where everyone's a winner, almost like the Darren Jarman sort of Paul Salmon trade, which involved about 8 different clubs, and everyone got something fantastic out of it. And Eagleton was a great young player for us. I mean, he played for the country in '98, was on the borderline of All Australian that year as well, I think. Had a bit of a down year in '99, but in the end, I mean, Montgomery had 126 games, best and fairest, All Australian, won a premiership. Bishop, 132 games, premiership. They were just absolute locks in our back line in those years.
Yeah, just terrific. And Bishop, I remember seeing Bishop play against us in a game against Melbourne, and he just looked so good. Big, tall, mobile, rebounding guy. And I was quite surprised when we got him, and I think he'd been probably was one of the best games he played. Yeah. So probably had other games where he was a little more anonymous, and they were more willing to let him go than I would have thought based on that. But he was just a terrific player for us, and to see a guy like that his height and dash and rebound. And quickly, we just go back and mention Paxman, because I think we only talked about Primus in the end, but was just such a good fullback for us, such a strong, reliable guy. And I think that's was it the spoil of the Brisbane game that we won?
Round 4, 97.
Yeah, when we'd lost our first 3 games, and it was like our first win, and he just gave above and beyond the call of duty to save that game from getting away, and that was the sort of the way he played. Very unfashionable player, but so effective.
What do you reckon, Rick?
He wanted to continue on, didn't he? And we sort of wanted to push him out in the end. Is that right? Or did he naturally come to an end of the playing career?
I think he wanted to go around one more year, 04, but didn't happen.
Yeah, it didn't happen. But no, I thought he was a great defender. He had a bit of that Rob Carter head angle to him, didn't he? But I thought Montgomery was a magnificent reader of the play. One of those smaller players where he was so strong overhead and was willing to take the hit to sort of be that third man. And him and Bishop were both influential. And I guess Bishop was a bit similar to Toby Thurston's in a bit of a maligned player. But I could see the value of Bishop in our side, and he provided that versatility that we love down back, with being able to play tall or small, but he had fantastic dash and both great servants. And I thought it was an equal trade.
Indeed.
To be honest. I think everyone won, and there doesn't need to be a one isolated winner out of that deal. And Eagleton forged out a great career for the Bulldogs.
He played 222 games for the Western Bulldogs, so no doubt the Dogs got fantastic service out of that trade as well. Bishop was just a wonderful rebounding, third tall defender. He was arguably the best sort of third tall defender in the league across that sort of 03-04 era there. And Brett Montgomery, he came over as sort of a high-flying, flighty, inconsistent forward flanker, and we just turned him into the best halfback flanker in the league.
He really became one of those, the intercept halfback flanker, almost the archetype of that type of player, that he would just drop off his man and just float across half forward, and just because he was such a great marker. I think he put away the big screamers, got put away in the kit bag, because I think he copped a couple of injuries, hurt his knees a couple of times going for those big hangers and coming down, and really just relied on his reading of the play, and he was a great marker, normal ground level anyway, and just really became a terrific intercept player and an integral part of that 2004 premiership side.
Another one who was probably his best mate on a back flank there was Damien Hardwick, who we picked up from Essendon, and he had a fantastic career at Essendon. He was an All Australian player. I think he won a best and fairest there as well. We got him for 2 picks at the end of 2001, and he came over. Only played 3 years at Port Adelaide, but what a 3 years they were.
Yeah, just really added some fire and some steel to the Port side. I think we'd been a bit, had our reputation for being a bit flaky in finals, and really came across and brought some that know-how with him, and maybe went a bit overboard, I think, in the early part of his time at Port. I think there were a couple of suspensions in there that probably were a bit of extravagant activity, I guess you could say, or extravagant behaviour, but just a terrific player. Another one of those blokes who could just drop off and read the ball coming in, playing across half back, read the ball coming in so well. He could basically just destroy a forward and be attacking as well, and his particular brand of aggravation just could get under the skin of anyone. And he was in that 2004 grand final. I think it was Ackermanis who lost the plot with him at one stage and just shoved him into the centre square. He was great value, Demer. He was so entertaining to watch, and I think in the end, Mark nursed him along quite well because his knees were pretty shot by the end of his career, and we just sort of managed to keep him playing even despite that.
He was what our playing group needed, though. A bit more maturity, a bit more composure under pressure, and that hardness. And he was really, like you said, he was really able to, when he needed to, create that distraction for the opposition, which then allowed us to do what we needed to do. So it was one of those great trades that worked out well for us, and it's that sort of player we're probably looking for now in our side. That bit of almost a bit like maybe Paul Chapman sort of. Just to slot in with a bit of experience and but a bit of ability to distract the opposition team and plug a hole for us.
You had to do it, Rick, didn't you? You had to mention Paul Chapman.
I couldn't help it.
I love it. Well, look, speaking of hardness, Byron Pickett, what an enigma he was for Port Adelaide. He came, he conquered, and then he left. Simple as that.
And another man who forced the AFL to create some new rules, only this time in terms of reporting. I mean, what can you say? He was the human wrecking ball, just brilliantly talented player and could deliver the most perfect bump. I think he had that tremendous core strength, barrel chested, and just timed his bump so well. I remember when he was playing at Port Adelaide back in under 17s or 19s, and he got quite a reputation there for his ability to hand out shirt fronts and basically break collarbones. And you'd see league players would go and watch the under 19s or 17s play just to watch Byron play, just to see if he picked anyone off that day. And I think it was at Brendan Crummell, that famous bump he handed out when North Melbourne were playing Hawthorn, and I think it was replayed on the footy screen at Footy Park that night, and everyone just sort of went, "Oh, wow, that would have hurt." And came to Port, and probably that bumping, he was a bit like Granger in the sense that his ability to just split you up the middle overshadowed his skill a bit, and became a bit more of a focus of his football talent, when he was just a superbly skilled player and quick and read the play well, beautiful skills. And I mean, his 04 grand final was just an amazing game of footy.
Do you think he really got distracted with the physicality, or was it more a media beat up? I think he was just, like you said, a perfectly executable player when it comes to the bump. He just did it so well, and the AFL didn't like it. And so they tried what they could do to minimise his impact in being able to execute those in the games.
His career did get kind of ruined, I think, in the end. There were a couple of bumps that he laid in 2005 where he just shouldn't have even been reported for them. I think there was one against Carlton late in the year where he ended up getting suspended for 2 weeks for something that wouldn't even be a report these days. I mean, it was really bad. I think he was pretty much picked out of the AFL. in that regard. And as I said, he conquered, he won the Norm Smith in 04, and then he left. Went to Melbourne, and no one really saw much of him there either.
No, he did a few things there. He knocked out poor Kane Corns, I think, in one game. It wasn't really a bump as such. I think he just tackled. Pinned his arms. It was pretty unlucky that it panned out the way it did. And I don't think he bumped that many guys. It was just that you were always waiting for it, and that he could do it so well. But yeah, as you said, I mean, the Begley one was, certainly didn't deserve 6 weeks. I think that was when they brought in the new grading system and basically threw the maximum level of every grading at him, and copped this huge suspension for bumping a guy who basically all he wound up with a sore neck, played the rest of the game and came out and played the next week despite all this talk, he had concussion and this had happened and that had happened. But Begley was fine, played the next week, didn't seem to be any issue, but Byron got something like 6 weeks for that. And you sort of knew
He got reported because it was ugly, and it was the potential of what it could have done, and not what it actually did do. It was a bit of hysteria going mad by the AFL.
I think it was the perfect chance for them to play with their new system, and especially for a guy that it was sort of targeted at anyway, because he scared people. There's no doubt he was a scary guy to play against, and they were scared of their image, and so Byron copped it. But yeah, I remember that Carlton bump as you mentioned, and again you just wonder what was going on. And I think Mark Williams made the statement in the end that you just couldn't play him anymore.
Yep.
The rules had made him virtually unplayable, and that was we cleared him in Melbourne.
He shirt fronted the best bloke he could shirt front though in Rhett Piglands. Yeah. That was a fantastic clean up, that one.
Yeah, Rhett started it, Byron ended it.
Punishment. Yeah, because he ran at Byron, and Byron, okay, let's see what happens. And
poor Rhett.
I know he's captured reasonably on YouTube, but I think it just happened enough off screen. You didn't quite see the full impact. But yeah, a huge bump, amazing talent, and it was a shame the way that his career finished up. It's great that he's still back around at Port Adelaide and he's doing his bit, and he was one of the players that took Paddy Ryder out to dinner and a bit of a feed and a bit of a chat with some of the boys, and good to see Byron still at the club and doing his part, and yeah, terrific Port Adelaide person still.
Indeed. Now for one of the best value trades, not just for Port Adelaide, but arguably across the whole AFL of all time, which is Jay Schultz for Mitch Farmer and pick 71, which has just got to go down as the best value trade of all time. I mean, Jay Schultz has just been a monster since crossing over. He's played almost 100 games, kicked over 200 goals, just an absolute lock at full forward for us. Mitch Farmer played about 10 really unimpressive games for Richmond, and pick 71 was Ben Nason.
Yeah, Schultz is just a great warrior, isn't he? He's a gladiator, genuine gladiator, and that kicking action of his. I think a Western Australian commentator might have been Tom Griljasic one day talking about Scott Cummings, that he was like a sewing machine. It was just so precise and moved the same way every time. And Schultz is like that. You're always shocked when he misses, and such a heroic player. He's had some terrible injuries and just puts his body on the line, and got the knee and the ribs from Westhoff, pulped his spleen, and the eye
from
poking the eye.
Hey, he was faking that poking.
Cheap, boo.
Soft.
Remember, his eyeball was sticking out of his head, but he was faking.
It was hanging down his ankles, for God's sake.
But I mean, you never knew that Jay was going to perform to the level that he is now, though. When he was drafted from Richmond, I mean, he was, no offence to Jay, and he'd probably admitted himself he was a bit undisciplined and a little bit flaky. So you didn't know really what you were getting when he came across, and it's a credit to himself and the coaches that he's been able to turn it around and become such a fantastic forward for us. And, we don't play a system, and modern AFL doesn't play a system where it's easy to get over 50 goals from a full forward this year. But, in times gone by, he probably could have been in the 90s or 80s a 500-goal forward the way he plays.
Yeah, certainly the older style play, genuine 100-goal full forward, and he was dropped for a little while. Even when he came over here, it sort of didn't really click straight away. And I remember him going back to the Eagles, and I think he kicked 7 goals in a match there, and just was deadly accurate. And then got promoted back up into the league side, and I think he's just found another lease of life under Kenny Hinkley. But Kenny sort of made that statement about telling Jay, Jay, there is no fence around the 50-metre arc. You can actually go outside it. And Jay's just become a great lead-up-the-ground type of player as well. I think that's where Ryder's just going to be so important to us, that if Jay's up on the wing marking and Ryder's running back into the forward 50, you wouldn't want to be the key defender having to match up on him and getting caught one out, especially if he can have a run at the ball.
Yep. That's right. Now, I think there's one more player to mention who played just the 21 games for the Port Adelaide Footy Club. He crossed over from Collingwood, but I doubt anyone will have as much impact as J-Mac has had on our club in such a short space of time.
Yeah, I guess we talked about tragedies earlier, didn't we? And, I mean, that's just the ultimate one. A good player, he was a good player, and I think under Ken would have been, a first 22 player, and one of those guys that's a real creating a bond, that real bond we're sort of seeing in their team. And I think it's something that doesn't get talked about a lot with the sides under Cale, and especially the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, that there was a real bond between those guys: Hines, Hodges, Brown, the Smiths, Marnie, Williams, Northeast. They were all really good mates and had a really strong connection on and off the field. And I think we're getting that with these guys now, and I think J-Mac's right at the middle of that, and there's such a tragic loss, but also he's become a real glue of that side, and those guys have really bonded together that were involved in that whole terrible incident. And it's terrible. It was just an awful day. Another one of those awful things when you hear, something's happened to a player over in America, and you think, that's terrible, and then suddenly you get a call and someone says, I've heard it's J-Mac, and are you kidding? I've been there with this already. Can't believe that's the case. But yeah, it was. And I think there's some poignant photos of some of the guys. Certainly the picture of Jackson Trengove going back there this year, and it must be hard.
But his life hasn't been in vain, I don't think, because his spirits resounded within the footy club and with the players that he fell in love with the team, and it's clear that they play for his memory, and he won't be forgotten. And sometimes it's not about the quantity or the quality that you play; it's what you do, and he's left an imparting memory for everyone involved with the football club.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Good call. A good note to end it on, I think.
Well, the other thing I think too is we've got a few members of the board which are still young in their teens or early 20s, and I'd highly recommend YouTubing a lot of these players that have been brought up tonight. And I think some of the skills that you'll see from some of those players mentioned and some of the things they're involved in are worth having a look at.
Yeah, certainly. I think the beauty of YouTube is that it gives you a chance. I mean, we will probably not see much of like the McLeans or the Williams or the Ableys, where guys of my era never saw them play, and there just isn't that footage around. But now, certainly football from the 80s, 70s and 80s, it's available on YouTube, and beyond that, of course, the more recent stuff has just grown exponentially over the last few years, and you really do have a chance to see some of that, and it's great. There's one other player, I don't know, we didn't mention, I think Darryl Wakelin coming back to Port from.
Nah, he's a Port boy.
Yeah, well,
Can't breathe him in
those
there.
Wangers, and Wangers got a mention.
Ah,
And
guys are
Darryl
very
Wakeland, we did have to
sensitive.
trade for him. He cost us pick 4, and
That's very
fantastic fullback.
Yeah.
Fantastic fullback, Darryl Wakeland, and
He was.
for a few years there, just it was just take the kick in, kick it to Wakeland. Wakeland would mark it. It
Absolutely.
was a
we
great
missed that
strategy. It worked. There,
The get out of jail free
hopefully,
card.
Paddy
It's
Ryder
like-
was one of those
It
players.
was like that other recruit that we had to pull from Salisbury West, Scott Hodges. It was amazing how we were able to land him in our side and the wonders that he did as well.
Rick.
Well, Centrals did make him stand out of footy for at least a year to get a clearance back in the old days because he was in their zone. It was strange because his father played for Port Adelaide. It was only 4 games that Jeff played for Port, but he played for Port and he played for Woodville. And the rule these days is it's 1 game, I think, is the father-son rule in the Sandful. But back then he didn't qualify, and he actually lived in the bit of Salisbury that was in Central's zone, and Central's hadn't even noticed him until Sandboy Cup footy, and he played for Port the Sandboy Cup, which I think was under 15s, and had a terrific competition there. And Central's decided they wanted him, and the Hodges family were all just black and white blooded. I mean, Scott's I think Scott only has black and white blood, and there was no way he was going to play for Centrals. And yeah, it was quite a fairly ugly way that he was forced to basically stand out of footy to get a clearance to Port Adelaide, which he did in the end and became a legend of the club.
Absolutely. All right, guys.
We could have gone for 4
Could
hours.
have.
I told you, Macca.
We barely even scratched the
Break it
surface.
into 2.
Yeah,
Break it into two-
There was
2
had
parts.
hundreds of names ready to go. We didn't even do
Go
Phil
in,
Harrison.
Yeah, well, that's true.
Phil Harrison.
Phil Harrison with a gun.
Hey,
Well, Tony
put it-
Malakellis. You mentioned Spiro.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, here
Cool,
we go.
Tony. Yeah. All right, boys. Until next time.
All right.
Go
Okay.
Port
Have a good one.
Well, yes, indeed.
Go the power.
Go Port Adelaide.
Love you, Dom.
Love you, Dommy.
Wicket change to Sean Burgoyne, who delivers beautifully on the chest of Thurston. Pickett with the overlay.